Welcome to Fractional Futures, the essential podcast for CEOs, investors, and senior marketing executives looking to unlock the power of fractional marketing leadership. I'm Paul Mills, your guide on this journey, where me and my special guests uncover how this innovative leadership model is reshaping the business landscape. Whether you're a business leader looking to build a competitive advantage, an investor seeking to enhance the value of your portfolio, or a senior marketing executive considering a fractional career, this podcast is for you. We'll share expert insights, provide actionable strategies, and explore real-world success stories to help you leverage fractional marketing leadership for maximum impact. Tune into Fractional Futures and discover how to revolutionize your business and career. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Fractional Futures. And this is a first in a new season where I'm chatting to fractional leaders across the globe to get their perspectives on how the fractional leadership model is being embraced by the business landscape. And I thought for the very first one today, why not have someone who is the absolute opposite side of the world in a completely different time zone? I'm delighted to be joined by Michelle Allbon, who operates as a Fractional Chief Revenue Officer in New Zealand. And she's also the CEO and co-founder of the Fractional Directory. Hello, Michelle.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for having me today.
Good day. What time are you over there? It's 10 p.m. UK time. You're a different day to us now, aren't you?
I have to do all of my math. It's tomorrow and it's 9 o'clock in the morning. And it's also really confusing whenever someone hears my voice because they go, wait a minute, you're in New Zealand, but you sound American. So I have to do a lot of contextualizing whenever I get on calls.
So do contextualize. So what's an American doing in New Zealand? That's a long way from home.
Yeah. I decided we'd make a proper triangle. I'm from California and then we moved to London and then moved here. And I guess, that's the nomad in me that just can't stay put. But short answer is I married a Kiwi and we've just ended up building our life out here after living in San Francisco and London for, the formative decade and a half of my adulthood.
And I believe you've got a little one on the way, haven't you?
Yeah, truly fractionalizing my life here with one part of it being growing a human. And he's due in about 3 months from now.
Wow. So it's very close. And we can touch on that a bit later because obviously the fractional work style lends very nicely to having kids and fitting everything in. So we'll talk about that shortly. So absolutely. Michelle, let's just jump straight in, shall we? Obviously started off in America, traveled to UK, now in New Zealand, doing the fractional gig. How did you discover the fractional model? What were you doing before being a fractional CRO? Why did it appeal?
Yeah, so I think there's a common theme around people who end up in the fractional role, which is that it's not usually an intention. It's kind of something you just trip your way into. And that was absolutely true for me, is that my whole career I had worked in sales organizations. So even some of my first roles was in business development. And then I went up through sales management, sales strategy, and worked directly for CROs. And I kind of wasn't sure what that meant or how it would actually look when I went out on my own. But when we moved to New Zealand, I thought, well, this is my one shot to kind of reinvent myself and figure out what my skill set is. And when I first did that, I called myself an advisor because I thought, well, I understand so many broad aspects of revenue and go to market that I might as well not pinpoint a specific area and I'll just be a generalist. And I did a couple different gigs that were consulting, advisory, and then I met a fractional CMO, which fate have it was how I found fractional, because she was operating in this more traditional fractional model 2 days a week and integrated into a company. And when we were working together, me as a consultant and her as a fractional, I went, hold on, I would much rather be working the way that you are, where we don't even tell that you're not a full-time employee. You just happen to not work at this company 3 days out of the week, right? And she said, well, I have another client actually who needs one of you because you're my other half. And she's top of the funnel, I'm bottom of the funnel. And that was my gateway in, was basically just getting a client that was in my function, which is equivalent to, the bottom half of the funnel of a CMO. And I said, well, I'm just going to call myself a CRO then and see if that lands. And I have continued now it's been about 4 years where I still will do advisory and I'll still do consulting projects, but fractional as a model is my favorite way. It's where I make the best impact. And it's something that I think I've definitely become an evangelist of, because I think it's a more stable and kind of good way to build a career for people that are like me.
Fantastic. And in terms of over those last 4 years, what challenges have you had to overcome, I guess, personally and financially, as you kind of morphed into this new work style, I guess we call it, this portfolio work style, where it's kind of, I guess, a new thing in New Zealand, people finding their way. So what's the journey been like? How's it felt?
Yeah, I mean, my gosh, going from working in a salaried capacity and having a very defined leadership role and scope and team, and having all of that be completely off my plate and I didn't even have to think about it, to not having work unless I myself have gone out and scoped that work and committed that work, and also knowing that I'm actually in a better position when I don't have my whole year planned and when I'm only scoping things a quarter at a time, has been a fundamental shift in how I look at, I mean, my finances, my personal life, and when I'm having time off. It's a complete shift. And I think now, arguably, I had a child in between those 4 years as well. So I ramped up, kind of got to a place where I went, okay, here's my rhythm. Good, I have clients. Went on maternity and then kind of thought, oh my gosh, I want to keep doing client work again, but how do I do this as a first time mom? Ramped up. And then now I'm having my second kid and have built a company in between. So it's been quite the journey. But what's really interesting is that at each juncture, first of all, it's not been linear. I've been able to actually spin up and get to a full capacity and busy way faster than I would have expected. And I've also found that the pattern of the kind of work that I love doing and that comes to me as I've iterated on it is just so much easier to find, because I've kind of gone through the creative process of going, oh yeah, I could do a project like that, or I could do a gig like this, but I'm not going to. And so I've actually become a lot pickier in my qualification process so that when I take something on, I'm sure that it's going to be the right thing. And in the beginning, as you have to, I just said yes to everything, which was great. It was a great learning process, but it was really scary because I was used to being very good at what I do. And the first couple projects I did, I was thinking to myself, oh my God, am I cut out for this? I actually don't know if I should go into business on my own. It was really scary. And especially going through these huge changes of life and identity, it's been an absolute ride.
It sounds like a very hectic 4 years. Certainly from my research and understanding and speaking to many people, the US seems to be firmly established across all the different flavors of fractional leadership. Tell the people listening in, what's it like in New Zealand? Is there a strong fractional community? Is it still embryonic state? What's it like?
Yeah, so it's really interesting, and I've become very interested in actually looking at this in kind of a macro industry trend perspective. And it's really easy to start by going, what's it like in New Zealand versus other parts of the world? But actually, the truth is the US has formalized a lot of this as a model and has even popularized the term fractional. And it is disproportionately the place where most of the use cases have been in the last couple years. And then it has spilled over into there being more in Europe. And, I would say UK might even be further ahead than other European countries. And then to Australia and New Zealand. And even though there has been lots of things going on, everyone is kind of still at this early, disorganized, like the difference between virtual and fractional, and people talking about consulting versus fractional. We're actually, I think, only in the last 3 or 4 months starting to see indicators that it's organizing and getting more understood. Otherwise, I wouldn't even say that New Zealand is significantly behind everywhere else. I think it's more representative of the majority of the world, which is that it isn't quite a mature industry yet. So there's a lot of people that are seeing what's going on in private equity and in venture. And I'd include Canada, so all of North America, because Canada has some very mature use cases too. And they're going, oh, why don't we try that? But then there's also a lot of people that are going, well, fractional is whatever I want it to be. And it's the same thing as consulting. And so we're in a place in New Zealand, particularly, and this is unique to here, that there is a very strong generalist industry and expertise in business because in the history of New Zealand, we haven't had the luxury of all of these niche experts. So the way that people have succeeded at doing business in the last 10, 20, 30 years is by being a really well-rounded expert. So there are a lot of advisors and there's a lot of consulting firms, and even in government, there's quite a lot of these kind of advisory roles. But people are not specialized by domain in the same way that the fractional model is asking for. And so actually trying to organize it here has been very, very challenging, but it's good because I anticipated that. I see New Zealand as a really good problem to solve because if I can help organize this small market, then that shows that it's possible to organize other small markets. A bit of a long answer there, but I do think that it's not that just New Zealand's hard. I think the vast majority of the world is hard to organize right now, and we're really only starting to get traction very recently.
And I think you're right there. And I think, one of the big, I guess, catalysts for the popularization of fractional leadership was COVID. I think that global pandemic, it kind of accelerated digital collaboration, which meant that you could collaborate more easily. You could choose a different way of working. You could work from home or work in different places, offering your service. And, I think that now that's becoming normalized. People are saying, actually, we can be a bit more entrepreneurial with this opportunity.
Yeah.
And that's where it's going. And you're right to flag the differences between fractional CMO or a fractional leader versus a virtual leader. They're both the same thing, aren't they, really? And it's interesting, this vernacular is still taking shape.
Big
So
time.
it's interesting because in this, I guess, formative environment where there's different countries at different stages, how are business leaders in New Zealand embracing the model? Is there any misconceptions?
Yeah, and it's really interesting because I have actually found myself being especially pedantic about vernacular because coming from a background of go to market, when you're describing features and functionality and value outcomes, if you are describing a feature set just slightly different and off, a lot of times the expectations from the company can be wildly different, and the pricing for that model can be wildly different coming from software sales. And one of the first things I saw here is that there's a lot of the same, I guess you would say, objections, which is virtual and consulting and fractional. It's all mostly the same thing, right? And this has been around for years. It's just people kind of rebranding something different. And, we don't really have to be specific. We just kind of should be solving challenges for businesses. And then what it's called doesn't matter. And the revenue and go-to-market person in me is screaming because I'm like, that's not true at all, because you can sell the same piece of software to the wrong end user for a tenth the price. And so when we look at this fractional model, in my view, it is the enterprise level of investment. Like, I have the same skill set whether I'm operating as an advisor, a virtual resource, or a fractional resource, but you're going to probably invest the most in me and pay me the most if I'm fractional, because the expectation is that I'm as close to integrated as a full-time executive in your bench as anyone else. I'm just working less than 5 days a week. Whereas the expectations when you go down from that are lower. That virtual does mean, hey, if we have a hybrid workplace, I'm not expected to show up to the, quarterly business meetings in person and fly to another country. If I'm working as an advisor, I'm not expected to get my hands dirty and show up for a whole day. I'm just giving advice, right? And if I'm working as a consultant, I have license to kind of tinker in other areas, and I don't have to be as transparent about what I'm doing. And I'm certainly not Michelle, the person leading this team or this division, right? I'm just kind of the person there to make some changes or give some suggestions, and I can be a little bit cagier about what I'm here to do. And so actually, when you really look at them, they are distinctly different models. And how they're priced, whether that's hourly or daily or retainer, I think there's actually a lot more structure and swim lane in there than people realize. And the more we can differentiate that and say, you don't have to be in a fractional model all the time, but we actually want to be calling things correctly, easier it will be for companies to use the right tool for the right situation. And right now, I'm seeing a lot of people hiring fractionals, expecting consultants, and then getting the right outcomes because the scope was wrong. And so I want to see that. I want to see that organized. I want to see this actually being talked about in a more precise way.
I think you're right there, and I've certainly, since I launched VCMO last year, I've been analysing the world. It's great having things like LinkedIn and having RSS feeds set up and just seeing what noise is being made. And certainly in the last 3 or 4 months, I think you mentioned earlier that it's starting to get bigger now. It feels like we've turned a corner with this model.
Big time. Big time.
In all locations, which is exciting. Do you think the actual term fractional is a difficult word? I know it was coined in the US, so I'm not blaming US people at all for this, but a lot of the noise, certainly I've seen in the UK from your traditional marketing consultants, they see the term as a jazzed up consultancy role, and people are jumping on the bandwagon because it's the new buzzword, it's the new thing in town. Do you think the word fractional itself is a problem word, or do you just think a word is a word? People, as long as it's defined in the right way and it's educated in the right way, it doesn't matter.
It cracks me up. It's always the CMOs. I've probably had 5 or 6 CMOs gone, can't we just rebrand this? Can't we call it something a bit stickier? And what's really funny is that it has a lot of context. And I actually think that this is something that I've learned as we built a directory. And, directory is different than a marketplace because we've actually gone out and tried to map the entire market of every single person. And, we're a LinkedIn developer partner. So we're using LinkedIn as our de facto source of what is in the job market and how are people articulating themselves, right? And both New Zealand and now we're in Singapore, we've had to go through and do this very monotonous exercise of essentially looking at every single person that is in LinkedIn's database that has the word fractional in their title. And what we learned is that first of this came from academia. It's actually an academic term because what happened is that a professor who's an expert in a domain, and I keep using the word domain instead of business line, which sounds very academic, but when you think about it, there's only so many categories in business. There's operations, there's finance, there's marketing, there's sales, right? And it's the same if you're in biology or in the natural sciences or whatever. You point back to an area of expertise. And there's typically people that are professors who also might speak on behalf of their expertise in other capacities. They might be on television, they might be writing books. And so this word fractional actually comes from them fractionalizing their time as an expert in an area of academics into different engagements. And so from that view, it's very academic and it's very precise. It's like I'm taking my expertise in climate science and I'm both a professor and I'm also an author and I also host a podcast on it, and each of those is a fraction of my capacity, right? And so I think that if you think of yourself as an expert in an area or a domain of business, and then you go, well, I'm fractionalizing myself into running one business here, doing my own company there, or running 2 or 3 different business models here, I actually think it's actually very specific. I think the bigger problem is that when people go, isn't it the same thing as a consultant? A consultant doesn't have to have the same level of domain expertise. If anything, they might be in a few lanes. They might have more generalist or broad expertise. And so to me, I love it. I think it's as precise as you can possibly be about what it is, but I think it's vastly misunderstood. And when we went and mapped out Singapore, I saw fractional real estate investment. I saw fractional NFTs in art. Fractional actually was in all kinds of applications, but it's always talking about expertise, always.
That's it. It'd be great if you can tell, as a LinkedIn partner, if you can tell LinkedIn to pull their finger out and actually make fractional XXX or whatever a proper title that people can use. Because obviously you can put it on your headline, but as a skill, it's missing from the skills list. So I'm just waiting. That will be a watershed moment, I think, when LinkedIn finally offers all the variations of fractional leader
Oh,
on the platform.
can't
It'd be
wait.
great, a great day.
Maybe 12 months time. I'm holding out for it.
Absolutely. Yeah. What advice would you give a CEO who is probably considering introducing a fractional leader into their business strategy? How do you overcome their objections to bringing us on board?
Yeah, so I think one of the bigger challenges, and this does come full circle to what people say, where you need to start is not going, oh gosh, I'm missing marketing capabilities, so I'm either hiring a CMO or a fractional CMO, right? What you need to actually start with is what are the deliverables and outcomes and strategies that your current leadership bench is light in or is missing completely. And that's not usually how people start the conversation. They go, I need somebody to run sales. I need somebody to run marketing. But then it's really difficult because if you look by industry and by stage of company, like an early stage startup would need a completely different situation than a established company who's going through a lot of change. You say, what are the problems or the strategies that we need to address? So like, for instance, we've created a set of standardized deliverables by domain. So you might say, I need someone who can go out and design and lead a strategy that will make us a leader in our industry, in a market, or will improve our brand perception, or will organize a sales team to be able to see a certain amount of revenue over 12 or 24 months, especially if they're VC backed. Those are those kinds of top level strategies of something that you need to achieve. And then the question of full-time or fractional becomes how? How do you achieve said strategy? And there are situations where actually you do need someone full-time. The how is you need somebody working at least 40 hours a week, going out, and especially if what you need is to fundraise, then oftentimes you need a old-fashioned full-time executive bench, and that's completely fine. But if you need something relatively quickly, like within 3 to 6 months, you need to see a lot of change, or you need to put a framework together, or you need to organize something, that's where people's brains go to consultants, because they go, well, I hire a big four, and then they figure out who we need to keep and who we need to lay off, and they do all this organizational change. But the problem is, if you're working backwards from a specific part of the organization, that's easier than from a generalist value proposition. So if you're saying, I need to have this much revenue in 12 months' time, then the answer might be, well, then we need to change the structure of our organization. Or it might just be, then we need to have a better understanding of our value proposition and get the right sales meetings in front of the right persona, right? And I think what happens is that people who operate fractionally have so many more frameworks to say this is how you get something up and fast, whereas people who operate traditionally are looking at a longer horizon. Companies right now, in a majority of places in the world, don't have extra budget and extra time. We are in a bit of a triaging moment economically around the world. And so it's really easy for us fractionals to go, pretty much in every situation, we're going to win if you're looking at hiring a full-time person, because we can get things up faster and we're going to cost less overhead. So we can win that argument. But the truth is a lot of that is because of where we are economically, more than just the fractional model is better than full-time. The truth is there's problems to be solved. A lot of those problems actually fit better in the wheelhouse of someone who knows how to operate fractionally than full-time. Individual circumstances will dictate who the right hire is. The problem is a CEO or a founder not even knowing how to qualify a fractional or even put them in the running to start with. And that's this education piece that we're trying to do, is we're trying to get them to understand how to even evaluate it as a viable option.
You touched on it just there about the fractional model being agile. It's that accelerated accessibility to that expertise that can get your business running faster. And certainly in the UK, the fractional model seems to be really embraced out of all the sectors, the SaaS sector,
Yep.
and those high growth, early stage scale ups, which are looking for new and innovative ways of getting up that traction curve as fast as possible. Are you seeing that in New Zealand as well? Are there any particular sectors that are taking it forward faster than others? How are the traditional sectors like legal, accountancy? Are they embracing it the same?
Yeah, so I think there's two factors here, and this becomes another one of New Zealand is just a microcosm of the rest of the world. So what's happening here isn't actually as unique to New Zealand as it is just kind of proportionate to most of the rest of the world, which is that SaaS and technology tend to be willing to try things that are on the cutting edge faster and quicker, and their mindset is more change oriented than traditional industry. So I think that sure, absolutely works great because a lot of the milestones you have to hit in SaaS are very fast. You're looking at trying to accomplish things within 6 to 12 months. Whereas if you look at construction or you look at traditional manufacturing or primary industries, you may not actually move as fast as 6 or 12 months when you're trying to move a business model. But one thing that is actually a huge consistent trend around the world is that even if your expertise isn't in technology or SaaS companies, let's say you come from traditional manufacturing, most fractionals have had to work with some kind of software. Like they've had to go in and digitize and build systems and processes using technology in the last 5 to 10 years. And that actually isn't true with traditional leadership teams in, a lot of these industries that have been a little bit more stable. Like here we have dairy. That's a relatively traditional industry. And one of the wonderful folks in our fractional industry, he's a fractional inside of there doing AI and doing kind of an experiment on how can we even use AI to improve our systems and processes. And people would go, wait a minute, what on earth? That's dairy. Why are you even talking about that in that sector? But the world that I come from, having worked at Cisco and Oracle, kind of sees things as there isn't these boundaries of there's traditional industries and then there's technology. It's kind of like every industry has some aspect of technology in order to make it function. But the truth is that there's a massive skills gap where quite a few of the people who are deep domain experts in that industry have not had to pace with the technological change and the digitization that has happened in the last decade. So now we're stuck in this strange place where we can still operate, we can still be doing all of these traditional industries, but suddenly we actually need to be thinking of them more as technology companies, which is a really weird paradigm shift. And a lot of the fractionals here have, in fact, out of our proportionate, database of people, 85% of them have technology listed as a skill. Even if that's not because they work in SaaS, they just understand how to apply technology to use cases. And I think that is almost kind of like the secret tool that really makes a lot of fractional people highly effective.
I think you've just hit all the nails on the head there. So yeah, I think you're certainly right. I was going to ask you before we sort of talk about your very exciting organisation that you're setting up in New Zealand. I'm going to ask you a quick question here. Is fractional leadership here to stay, and where's it going to be in 5 years' time?
I love that. I think it is a natural part of the structure of work evolving. It's kind of like saying, is remote work here to stay, or is it a fad? Are we all suddenly going to go and buy office space? Like, is video conferencing just a fad? Then we're going to go back into calling each other on cord phones, right? Like, progress does not go backwards. Technology does not move backwards. It only moves forwards. And the truth is that fractional as it sits is just saying that you don't have to put expertise and a traditional leadership model into 5-hour or 5-day work weeks with 40 hours. And in a lot of ways, we've kind of been saying that for a while, that a lot of these structures we're operating in are old and don't work. And if you look at the generation gap and the expectations of 21-year-olds coming out of university. Do they expect that their career is going to be 40 hours a week going into an office? Absolutely not. Many of them can even have careers that don't exist yet. What I studied in university and then what I do for a job didn't exist when I was in university. And so I think that fractional is just, whether it is permanently called this, who knows? But it's just going to be what leadership is in the future. It's just taking people and using them for their expertise and integrating them in a model that makes the most sense for a company instead of by some preset model that is supposed to be optimum. And I think that if the traditional model was working, we wouldn't see all of these alternative models rising. We would just continue working 40 hours a week and having the old way because it's working, but it's not working. So I think that we're going to continue seeing more shift and change until we find something that does work and gets us the outcomes that we need.
I think you're right. I think, I don't know, for decades and decades, hundreds of years, we've been working the 40-hour week. It's a work style. And I think this is a new, it's competition to the traditional 40-hour week. And that's how I like to think of it, is it's a different work style. Some people want to do 2 days a week. Some people want to work weekends. Some people want to work night shifts. Some people don't. It's just another work style, which gives you more flexibility. And I guess it's a win-win, really, because it's a win for the employee that chooses this work style, because it's a work-life balance that they can achieve. And it's a win for the businesses because they don't have to necessarily, they don't have to hire someone full-time. They don't have to have the risk of a six-figure salary on the P&L. They don't have to worry about pension costs and insurance costs and remuneration and the fear of an employment tribunal, or the cost of exiting someone out of the business if they're underperforming. So you can, it's a real de-risking model. I personally think it's here to stay. And I think in 3 or 4 years' time, there'll be a lot of business leaders thinking, why didn't we do this 20 years ago?
Absolutely. And I think it's really important to say not anyone can just decide that it's a style that they're going to operate in tomorrow. It is a skill set. Just as if you were going to be an executive, you have to have a specific skill set. You have to have a fractional skill set to have this outcome orientation and to be able to accomplish what is needed in fewer total hours. But I think that's the big secret, as people talk about quiet quitting or all these other things that you're doing in your 40-hour work week, the side hustles. And what we're actually seeing is we're seeing a truth, which is that work doesn't take all of the 40 hours necessarily to accomplish the outcomes people are hired for. And so people are starting to create these ways to kill time to justify their salary. And the truth is if we're actually better at just scoping the true need, then we can just cut out the fat and say, this is what the company needs. And everything else you have the freedom to do on your own time. And I think that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, I think I've been saying for years and years that most companies operate at probably 30% of their true capacity or productivity.
Absolutely.
We spoke earlier about the fractional space. It's embryonic, it's forming, it's norming, all this kind of good stuff. You're doing something quite exciting in New Zealand with your Fractional Directory. Do you want to explain to the listeners what that's all about?
Yeah, so my biggest learning when I first started working fractionally was I also thought maybe this is just another flavor of consulting. And management consulting is the term that I had heard the most often. And so I thought that's what I was going into. And then as I started realizing that I genuinely could get the outcomes companies were needing in a few days a week, because that is possible, I didn't actually believe it, because I was very much brought up in the Silicon Valley. You need to be working 60 hours a week, and your company's your family and your job, and it's where you spend all your time. So it was actually very confronting for me to realize, actually, I can call it 2 days a week focused into a company, and I can get the outcomes they need. And when I realized that, I thought, well, am I the only person in New Zealand? Really? I mean, me and these handful of people that I've met, are we it? Is that the only people that are doing this? And so we created essentially a yellow pages to just go, well, businesses should be able to look not just me up, but the couple other people I know, and then at least we can legitimize that this is a real thing. And we started with 40 people. And we thought, that's pretty cool. It's not just 5 of us, there's actually 40 people. And we made it really easy to add whenever people's title changes on LinkedIn. They end up in our directory, and then if they add themselves. And now, I mean, we're knocking on close to 400 people in New Zealand. And, that's in less than a year to go tenfold in the growth of how many people are choosing to identify themselves in this model. And what's so cool about that is it shows that my discovery of how I got here is exactly what's happening to other people. They're going, I could operate in all of these different ways, but actually the fractional model is what I want to be working in. So I'm going to go out on a limb and brand myself that way. And a lot of people are jumping on and branding themselves this way, and as they do that, we're mapping what's there. And so it's been so cool. I mean, we're only coming up to 1 year next month from the MVP of what we created, and now we're launching in Singapore a year later to go and have the exact same structure of just mapping out who's there. And I think why I love it is because there's so much we need to understand before this becomes a standardized market. And it's very easy for us to jump and go, let's create jobs in it and let's promote it and brand it. But I think we just need to understand who's coming to this pool. What are their skill sets? What does it look like? And are people doing it as an opportunistic thing? They're just using the brand and then they get a full-time job? Or are we, which I'm seeing, actually starting to see a groundswell of people like me who step into it and go, this is probably my permanent career choice. And all of this is happening now. We're at as you say, the embryonic state of we have use cases, but 12 and 24 months from now, this is going to be a much more organized place than it is right now. And so it's just so exciting to be able to actually have data and to be at the edge of the trend. And that's really what we've built, is just something that can capture and be articulate about who's coming to the market and what skills they have.
Fantastic. I wish you all the very best. Well, I was going to say, actually, as you're talking there, is there an age limit as to when you can actually be a fractional? Because if you've got someone coming straight out of university saying, I like the look of that work style, can you really be, because we've been talking a lot about expertise, haven't we? And someone coming out of university, you probably say, well, actually, have they got enough commercial expertise to make this work for them? What are your thoughts on that? It's just come to my mind. So I thought, while you're
It's
on
a
the
really
line.
good question. It comes up a lot because people go, oh, that person doesn't look like a fractional. And to me, what it is that a fractional leader is that there's someone who has managed an organization. And there's a reality that coming from San Francisco and the universities that feed it to startups, I actually do know people that by their mid to late 20s, between their undergraduate and what they did in their first 5 years out of school, are some of the world experts in some fringe areas because of their academic background. Are those disproportionately the people that exist in the world? Absolutely not. They're like the 1%, right? And even me being in my late 30s, I'm very young for being fractional. Most people have at least 20 years of experience having led teams. And so I would say there's not by any means an age limit, but there's just a reality of like, how fast can you actually go and become an expert in something? And even myself, I've had that imposter syndrome of, have I done enough to feel like I'm an expert? But then I take a step back and I go, well, yeah, I was in one of the fastest environments in the world that put me through its process. So that's why in my late 30s, I'm qualified, but very much in the minority age-wise. The majority of people, have 20, even 30 years of experience. And that's who people would be comfortable calling a true fractional leader.
I think that's probably a good point to close that. A nice mic drop moment there. So that's fantastic. If you've been watching or listening to this episode, I hope you found value from the discussion, and I hope you've been inspired by Michelle's journey there. In our next episode, I'm going to be speaking to someone from the US, so stay tuned for that, and I look forward to going live for that one very soon. Michelle, thank you so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed hearing about your journey, and I wish you the very best of luck with Fractional Directory.
Thank you so much, Paul. It's been a pleasure.